Before I begin, can I borrow $20 from someone? Does anybody have $20? Yeah, can I borrow $20? Awesome, thank you. This $20, for many of us, represents a dinner out at a restaurant tonight for one, or a movie ticket to the latest IMAX 3D movie theater, or maybe a pledge on Kickstarter for the best backpack ever invented. But the bottom line for us is that this $20 is somewhat disposable for many of us. Now, in other places around the world, this $20 represents food for a family for a week, or medicine for a child to remain healthy. But sadly, in far too many places in the world, this $20, the $20 that you gave me because I'm a speaker on a stage, this $20 can enslave my family for generations. A simple and seemingly insignificant loan of this $20 for food or clothes or school supplies can quickly become a complex and insurmountable debt. A slave owner will loan this $20 to a family and simply say, "Come to my factory and work it off." But the reality is, it's a debt that is impossible to pay off because the loan is a trick to just create a false sense of obligation. And once they do that, they got you. Slavery today exists not so much as the picture of physical shackles of bars and chains, as much as it is the financial shackles of debt and poverty. But it's just as binding, and the enslavement is just as real. There are 40 million slaves in the world today, many of whom were bought for as little as $20. Now, this number 40 million can be a little bit hard to comprehend, so let me break this down for you today. 40 million people is approximately the population of the great state of New Jersey, of New York, and Connecticut, and Rhode Island, and Massachusetts, and Vermont. Now, you would think that if the population of these 6 states were all enslaved, you would think that the world would know about it, that the world would be outraged by it, and that the world would do something about it. And yet, somehow, 40 million people have slipped under the radar, and the world, for the most part, does not know about it, is not outraged by it, and is certainly not doing enough about it. These 40 million people are located throughout the world. And so they are boys on a boat in Ghana. They are girls sold in bars in the Dominican Republic. They are families in factories in India. And they are little children in front of webcams in the Philippines. We met some of these 40 million slaves when in 2011 we received a phone call. And the voice on the other end of the phone told us about a brick factory in Chennai, India. And what they told us about this factory was that the factory owner was in fact a slave owner. And they asked us to intervene. So we accompanied Indian officials and police on their rescue operation at this factory. And we knew that what we would find would be absolutely heartbreaking. But what we didn't know is that when we asked, who of you would like to go free, 512 hands went up. It was our largest rescue operation at that time. And that's when the stories of abuse began pouring out. Men, women, children forced to work 16 to 18 hours a day, molding and baking and carrying bricks for little to no pay, violent beatings for not showing up to work or not doing enough work. The words told part of the story, but it was the scars on the bodies and the fear in their eyes that told us what we didn't need to hear. But now these people are free. Their lives are being rewritten, lives like Raja's and Sunitha's. The Indian government stepped up and issued release certificates and declared all of them free. 512 hands went up asking for their freedom, and that's exactly what they got, their freedom. But there's another part of this story that doesn't quite make it into the papers. You see, the slave owner was a man of considerable wealth and influence. And so he didn't spend one day in jail. And so while 512 people went to sleep that night in their newfound freedom, the slave owner also went to bed a free man. Now, sadly, throughout the world, this is a situation that we find far too often. A justice system that is unable or unwilling to arrest a slave owner. And unfortunately, in 2011, the Indian government was just one of those systems. Now, fast forward to 2016. We received another phone call about a brick factory in Chennai, and the frantic voice on the other end of the line told us the stories of violence and abuse, and it was familiar to us because it was the same factory and the same owner 5 years later. Once again, with Indian officials and with police, we accompanied them on their rescue operation. And this time when we asked who of you would like to go free, it wasn't 512 hands that went up. It was 564. You see, because the slave owner didn't spend one day in jail, he was able to replenish every single one of his slaves and then some. Once again, the Indian government stepped up and issued release certificates and declared each one of them free. 564 lives beginning their new life in their newfound freedom. But something happened in India between 2011 and 2016. During that intermediary time, the Indian government passed an amendment that made the punishment for slavery much more severe for the slave owner. And so while in 2011, the slave owner went free, in 2016, I'm happy to tell you that that slave owner was arrested and went to jail. Now, hopefully we can see that the difference in these stories is not what happened to 500 people. In both stories, 500 people were set free. The difference is not what happened to 500 people, but what happened to one person. In one story, the man went free. In the other story, the slave owner was arrested. Now, we will always pursue freedom for the enslaved, but we will also not stop pursuing arrest for the slave owner. In fact, for slavery to end, it's not enough to just rescue the slave. For slavery to end, you must arrest the slave owner. If that slave owner had gone to jail in 2011, that's 564 lives who would have never been enslaved. In other words, when you arrest one, you save hundreds. You arrest one slave owner, and that represents hundreds of lives who will never be enslaved and never need rescue. What became clear to us early on in the work that we did was that rescuing slaves is not enough to end slavery. For slavery to end, you have to arrest the slave owner. Now, another interesting thing that happens when you arrest the slave owner, and that is other slave owners take notice. You see, the reason why slavery exists in these communities is because the lack of adequate law enforcement. It's not that these laws do not exist, it's that they are not enforced. And there's no fear of prosecution. If you take our work that we've done in the country of Cambodia, 15 years ago, the brothel industry was running rampant with the sale of young girls for sex in the sex trade industry in Cambodia. But we worked with the government to work to arrest slave owners, and what ended up happening was amazing. 15 years ago, when police would look the other way while thousands of young girls were trafficked into the brothel industry, today, a specialized anti-human trafficking police force canvasses every corner of the country. 15 years ago, virtually no one went to prison for the sex trafficking of minors. Today, hundreds of pedophiles and traffickers sit in Cambodian prisons. 15 years ago, credible estimates were as high as 15 to 30% of all sex workers were underage. We saw thousands with our own eyes, but we started working with the government to arrest slave owners. And in a recent independent survey, the percentage of young minors available for sex in the brothel industry in Cambodia plummeted to less than 0.1%. But hold on. I mean, what happened here? How did thousands of girls find their freedom from the shackles of the sex industry in Cambodia? Did we physically remove all of these girls from their brothels? No. Did we physically close down all of these brothels? No. What happened is we started working with the government. And when the government started stepping up and arresting slave owners, what would happen is that a brothel owner would look down the street and they would see that that other brothel closed down. And they would not see the brothel owner anymore because he's sitting in jail. And then he would turn around and he would look at his own place and he would say, well, I don't want to be arrested. The only reason that I'm using young girls is because there's no fear of prosecution. And so he stops using young girls because the law is being enforced. In other words, when you stop one, you stop others. You stop one slave owner, and it stops other slave owners from ever using slaves in the first place. Now, hopefully, by now, you can understand and appreciate that for slavery to end, it's not enough to just rescue the slave. That may end slavery for that individual, but for slavery to end, you must arrest the slave owner. But now you may be asking, well, how do you do that? I mean, you're not the ones arresting them, right? I mean, you have to use the police and the courts to be able to do that. And aren't they exactly the people that weren't doing this job for so long? You're right. We're not the ones arresting anyone. We're not building jails and throwing people in it. By the way, that would be kidnapping. We need the police. You can't arrest someone without police intervention. And we need the courts to secure the conviction. You need the government to end slavery. But an amazing thing has happened. We found that as we step in to do the work, the government steps up to do the work themselves. We step in so that the government steps up. And so when we step in and the government steps up, what that looks like is a police force that before would turn a blind eye to investigating crimes and arresting criminals, now begin to see a pathway of justice being made clear to them. And so now they build the will to be able to investigate and to arrest. And so in a court system that before was not used to trying cases of human trafficking and slavery, now is seeing the pathway of justice and the success of swift and severe punishment for the slave owners, and they begin to follow that pathway by themselves. When you consider a government that would allow a slave owner 512 times over to walk away as a free man, that same government changes its laws to make the punishment more severe. And that same government trains their police officers to do the arrest. When you consider that the Indian government was once known as the epicenter of slavery in the world, and just a few months ago hosted an international anti-human trafficking conference in their country with key stakeholders from 18 other countries, when that same country, which was known as the epicenter of slavery in the world, now wants to be known as the epicenter of ending slavery in the world. When we step in, governments step up. And so it is just true that good organizations will do the work the government is unwilling to do. Great organizations will work with the government to help them do it themselves. The power of a false loan of $20 is enough to enslave a person for years. But the power of a government stepping up to arrest slave owners is far more powerful. There are 40 million people trapped in slavery in the world today. Here's how to end it. For slavery to end, you must arrest the slave owner. If you rescue a slave, you will change a life. But if you arrest a slave owner, you will change a whole community. And when governments step up to arrest slave owners, you will change the world. And when that happens, this loan of $20 can simply be paid back. Thank you.